same
Okay,
thing
let's
too.
not forget about cats. Is the old
No.
adage that cats domesticated us to conquer the world legit? Again, if we look at the internet, any internet, and I think we will have to admit a bit of a yes there, maybe.
Bullshit.
Okay.
So my issue with privileging one side of the relationship or the other, you're making the same mistake.
I see.
If we domesticate something, that's just as bad as saying cats domesticated us. It's funny. It's a nice inversion and therefore humor, but equally untrue. Again, it's the relationship and how that relationship forms.
So it always takes both sides. Is that what we're saying, basically?
And so that's my argument. And for every animal that we have really investigated, that's what's happening. Which is not to say that there aren't times when people are making deliberate decisions to manipulate the population structure, but there will be a period of time before anybody's making decisions about stuff, which is absolutely critical in forming that relationship, and that intentionality, or that the basis for that intentionality is predicated upon a reliance upon it that would have formed without any intention. Let me I think that's clear, but probably not. So it's like
no, not really.
So if we take let's say cattle.
Sorry, a cow.
There is yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so cow is a female, so that's why it's all, you want to say cattle, so it's both. But So what's interesting is that the common conception is there are cows or cattle, and people take them and they stake them, and boom, you've got domestication. When in fact, what it is looking more like is that you already have a relationship, and it may very well have been a hunting relationship, but people are following these animals, especially if they're migratory, where you're going high latitude during the summer, lower latitude during the winter. And you know where these herds are going. And very much like the wolves are picking off the caribou, you've got people picking off some of the sheep and the goat, and they're following them around. And then as people, for other reasons, are constrained to staying in one place, they cannot allow those animals now to keep moving. So then they start bringing them to them, and that's maybe when the staking and the corralling and the penning them happens. But that's not happening in a vacuum. They're penning them because they're already reliant upon them, and the reliance is because they've already formed a relationship with them. And that's what's really interesting to me, is looking at the archaeological record for evidence of those relationships that precede the things that most people think of as the beginning of domestication.
If we extrapolate this to cats, what could have happened here at the beginning of the relationship?
So we've got a fun story about this. We're still working on the paper. It's not out yet, but basically, the story of cats, 10,000. No, cats are also very,
but they're
in
ancient Egypt, at least, right?
Yeah. So Egypt is looking good. And what's curious about it is that in this case, without giving too much away, because we're still in the process.
No, you can give too much away. No problem.
Well, I know we're in the process of publishing, so there's the whole embargo thing and everything else. But
give us a little bit. Yes.
So a little teaser is that if you think about the relationships and how and why they're forming, so you can get sorts of things like if red junglefowl they like the grain that's being harvested, and so they're being attracted to the people. Or in the case of people, sheep, goat, and cattle, where we're kind of following them around a landscape, and then if we're no longer able to do that as much for other reasons, then we start penning them. Or in the case of chickens, once they get to Europe, then there's changes socially in terms of the behavior of the governments and what you're allowed to do because of the religious forcing of different dietary restrictions over the course of the year. So that's going to start altering your behavior about how you interact with animals. When you interact with them, and that starts changing their population sizes and the closeness with which you are doing that, that's going to alter that behavior. And it looks like there are some really interesting things happening in Egypt around there's a goddess called Best, and there are people who follow her, and there are temples that they go every year to, and they pay an homage, and they pay an homage in the form of a mummified cat. And this is requiring a huge production of cats to meet the demand for mummified cats to present as gifts to the goddess Best.
And how did they choose the cat? I mean, why cat? Why not something else?
Right. So for a long time, Best was portrayed with a lion head. Yeah. And then right about the time, then there's a shift. So it's still a feline, but then it gets into the North African wildcat. So there's just a cultural shift in the way that Best is portrayed and the animal with which she is associated. And however that happens, I'm uncertain. But once that happens, people then start effectively murdering lots and lots and lots of cats in order to put them into mummified packaging so you can then deliver it like you would if you went to a church now, you buy a candle and you put it up at the front in memory of someone. This is the same thing, only it's a mummified cat. But in order to do so, you need a lot of cats. And so you get as this huge production for these cats that then ends up bringing them in much closer relationship. We get a much bigger population and much closer association with people. And that starts to change the way in which they're hanging out with people. And because they form that relationship get much closer, then as people start moving, they start taking them with them. And now you start getting cats spreading all over the world.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing to Smart Cookies on YouTube. What else is there? Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you really liked what you heard, feel free to become my patron on Patreon by going to Patreon and becoming my patron. It's really easy. Just type Smart Cookies Podcast in there. You should be able to find me. Last but not least, I have to thank the absolute legends that are my producers on this show, my existing patrons on Patreon: Aida, Mancian, Miha Medved, Medinho, Gordon, Jurechuk, Lorenzo, Mila, Carmen, Taichi, Goran, and Veronica. Without you guys, this show wouldn't exist. So massive thanks. And yeah, see you in the next episode.